Okay, awesome. Well, for those of you who don't know, Karan is the Chief Commercial Digital Officer and Global Vice President for AstraZeneca. So Karan, thanks so much for joining us. And maybe I'll just kick off with the first thing. Just your title actually reminds me, over the last few years, we've all seen, CDO, CIO, and kind of variations of that role seem to be in vogue. And more often than not, it's kind of someone coming from outside of healthcare, from retail or tech, to come and essentially drive change and bring fresh perspectives into the healthcare sector. But you, on the other hand, you've kind of been a healthcare baby. So you've come through, consulting and different pharmaceutical roles. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey that has brought you to this point as the CDO of AstraZeneca?
Yeah, I know it's a great question. So maybe I'll just start on my journey a little bit and then talk about how the role's evolving and why it is the way it is for AstraZeneca and where I am. So you're right. I've been in healthcare for the last 20 plus years, and half of it, or being on the consulting side, and the others on increasing commercial roles within pharma companies. Last one, building and leading Abbott's digital health in the diagnostic side business before coming to AZ. And I think what was different in my journey is, through consulting, I learned the art of problem solving and creative problem solving. And when I transitioned into industry, I brought that element with me. So it was then about learning the business and learning our customers and learning the products and applying that same innovative mindset and creative problem solving to those challenges. The only difference was that most of the consulting work I did was also very heavily technology bent. So what we call digital now was IT enablement back in the day. So that stuck with me. And I always looked for technology as a means to bring creativity and innovation to those problems. And that sort of evolved into increasing digital, sort of roles along with the commercial responsibilities I had, then eventually led to where I am today. So I think the blend of technology, strong problem solving, and creative innovation, plus knowing the business and the industry really well, is sort of what got me to where I am. I think the role evolution, what you asked for, pharma struggled with the CDO role, to be fair. And they've struggled for two reasons. One reason they've struggled with is they've brought in people from the outside that don't understand the business well enough. And it's hard for them to translate the value digital brings to the use cases that are very specific. If you think of the evolution of pharma, it hasn't changed in the last 30 years. And to be honest, our business model, we keep talking about transformation. It should be talked about as evolution. Digital should evolve the business, not transform it. Our business model is here to stay. It's about how do we use it to become more customer-centric and data-driven. And I think that is the missing element that has now morphing the role of the CDO into more somebody who knows the business well, can apply this innovation and drive impact quickly.
Wow, that's interesting, and I'm sure some people will challenge that, so we welcome questions. So with that in mind, what is digital for you as Karan and for AZ as an organization? What does that entail?
Yeah, I think I just said it in my last sentence. It's being customer-centric, and it's being data-driven. That's how I define digital, and a good analogy to that is when you think about, pharma's evolution. Pfizer started this with Dendrite that they acquired that became IMS. And, at the time it was considered like, wow, we're using data to help salespeople get smarter about going to physicians and knowing what drugs were being prescribed. And you could consider that an early form of evolution or digital use of data. So the model's been evolving using data, right? And in the same vein, now the difference is that beyond sales, you have a multitude of channels in which this data resides. So when I talk about evolution, what I mean is our business model's disrupted because our customer expectations have changed. The channels we play in have changed. And the way people perceive value has changed. But the value we deliver at the core is still the same, which is great clinical therapy to impact patient outcomes. So then the question becomes, okay, now I have this multitude of data. How do I use this to guide more effectiveness, efficiency in my business model? Hence why I call it evolution.
That's interesting. So you still believe that your core offering is obviously the clinical therapies, the research that you're able to do on the drug side. So can you maybe contextualize that then in terms of some of the digital health initiatives?
Yeah.
There have been, and I'm not saying it's AZ, but generally speaking, there has been a bit of talk from pharma to really, change their business, become more digital. What does that all mean really? Because I think what you've said is spot on in terms of that clinical therapy being your core strength and your biggest strength.
Yeah. So, no, that's a great question. I think you have to boil that down to where do you see the value of digital therapeutics? I think that's the question you're asking specifically. And then, where do we actually play a role in that value chain, right? So from my standpoint, there are two things we're really good at. We are really good at the clinical know-how, which is at our soul, we're scientists, right? That's where we are good at. And we have good discipline, process, and structure around that. And the second piece we're good at is commercialization. We know how the market works. And if we have something good on our hands, we know how to scale it and drive value out of it. So then if you translate that to digital, you say, okay, how can I use those two strengths to bring value? And where is that value? So value for me breaks in three buckets. One is, and I'm talking from the lens of a commercial digital leader, one is going to be, how do I drive top of the funnel, get more patients understanding their disease, understanding their therapy, and shortening the gap from them acknowledging risk and seeking help. And then the second piece is, how do I drive the use of evidence-based therapy? So right patient, getting the right treatment at the right time. And then the third one is around, how do we continue to drive adherence and compliance? That still continues to be a 30 to 50%, degradation around those dimensions when patients leave clinical care. And that should be surrounded by real world data and evidence, which is missing. We don't do that today. We are very static, right? Things go out and then we wait 6 months later to know that. You don't have to anymore. And it's also missing on the component of diagnostics. So if you look at those 5 buckets, that's how you think about digital and the role therapeutics can play, right? So you have to say, look, is it helping me do any one of these things? And if it is, then it fits into my core model and I can scale it and monetize it. If it doesn't fit into any of that, then it becomes more challenging for pharma truly to scale.
So you almost planted the words in my mouth. So can you give me some of your examples? It doesn't have to be from AZ, but it could be from the industry of those who have scaled it and who have monetized it in digital health.
Yeah, so I think let's talk about more of the traditional, pharma companies, and then talk about sort of what the emerging landscape looks like. So the traditional pharma companies, right, you are seeing early use cases around combined digital therapeutics, right? These are connected inhalers, injectable pens,
right.
And there is no value there in terms of monetization. So to be clear, it's still an experiment. Like, I don't think anyone, in my peer group is going to say we are getting it reimbursed or we're able to convince payers that it delivers better outcomes. I think if you see the approach, ourselves or Novartis or GSK or Teva have taken, it's all like, let's give it away in the hopes that we collect the data and then we'll use the data to prove a better outcomes to the patients in the hope that that'll get to reimbursement, right? But it's not a proven model. There's still an experiment. I think that could be tangible for specialty products where patients need those interventions and need those data points to ensure they're using therapy the right way. So I do think there will be value there. It's not quite seeded yet. I think there is real world data that is emerging in RWE. There's clear value there. I think it can help us accelerate, figure out where our therapy fits more efficiently. It can help drive adoption of evidence-based care in a more efficient manner. It can ensure that we can glean where there are opportunities to do life cycle expansion of product, where we need to focus on more medical data to drive adoption. So I think there's a clear use case and value to us there. And then you see emergence of digital health platforms. And I think that is also quite interesting, back to the buckets I talked about, which is, growing the funnel on the top and driving evidence-based care. 95% of care happens outside of a clinical setting, meaning it's not episodic. It is really around, once a patient's discharged, you need to figure out what's going on with them, and clinicians don't know what's going on with them. So if pharma can play the role to bridge that gap, whether it's partnering on platforms or providing platforms, that enable data in the outpatient setting to get into the inpatient setting to drive more, I would say, efficient clinical workflows that can ensure that the right patient gets the right therapy at the right time. So that will yield in better outcomes as well as a value to the pharma companies.
That's so interesting that you mentioned platform. So most of the other conversations I've had with folks from around the industry, I think they don't want to ever hear the word platform again. And I also recently saw that you have a partnership with MassGen, and I think this is one of the platforms you're talking about. So is this kind of one of the experimental things you're trying, or is this something that's a bit more well thought out? And what is it looking like in execution? Because I think, conceptually, it all makes total sense in why it should be this way. But do these platforms actually work? Does that integration piece actually work?
Yeah, no, and those are good questions. So and this goes to what's happening in the digital health landscape more broadly, right? So 20 of the top, sort of emerging digital tech players, the likes of Livongo, Omada, Peer, all of those groups, there are 3 of them that have clinical evidence to show that remote monitoring or DTX drive pure outcomes, right? If you don't have clinical evidence, clinicians are not going to use it. So that's one gap we realized. And the likes of Livongo and Omada have done significant work in generating that evidence. So you see an adoption. They also have gone further up the value chain. So it's not just about the data and the platform. They actually put real people and clinicians behind providing a holistic experience to the patients. So you see a gap in clinical care there. So one learning was you need clinical evidence to show outcomes. Second learning is it has to integrate into your clinical workflow. Which a lot of these platforms are not integrated in the clinical workflow. Like, a clinician doesn't want to open up an asthma platform on their population to treat their asthmatic patients while they're treating their patient in the EMR. Right. They're not going to do it, so you don't see adoption. There is the third piece, which is they're not reimbursed at the moment. So for the providers, they're like, why would I do all this extra work when I don't make extra money? You've seen that with telehealth, right? Went up to 70%, it's down to 30%. Very simple, because in-clinic visits still make more money for the providers than telehealth does. That's the reason why you don't see that adoption sticking. Now, it's here to stay, but it's not sticking. And then your fourth piece is, you can't build platforms that are tech-driven. Platforms should be built based on clinical and evidence outcome. And I think that's what's unique. So your question, whether what we're doing at MGH is here to stay, I would say yes, because we took the approach that, look, this can be product-centered. It has to be patient-centered and based on clinical guidelines. And you have to partner with a health system to address a couple of things. How does it fit into the clinical workflow? So it's efficient in terms of usage. You're not adding more work to the clinician. 2, for the patient, if they're comorbid or they have multiple diseases, they don't want an HF app, COPD app, an asthma app, a diabetes app, and then 5 digital trackers. They want one ecosystem. So there is value to having an ecosystem and a platform, hence I say platform. And then third is you got to use the data and you got to democratize that data that the providers can use and we can use to sort of guide appropriate therapy to the right patients. And I think that's the win-win. Most of the things you've seen outside, they've actually made data the monetization element, whereas actually you should pivot that to outcomes as a monetization element. And I think that's where, we'll see a shift in the industry.
Super interesting. So I'm so curious to know, when you report back into the organization, so AZ in this case, on some of these partnerships, what are the metrics and KPIs you're measuring? Because is it how many data points you've collected? Is it how are you tracking the outcome? Because I guess we did say sometimes that's quite long drawn. Yeah. And I guess if you were to make it real for a pharmaceutical company, what are the KPIs that matter?
Yeah. So I think it is truly outcomes and funnel metrics, right? So make it tangible for you. So if you have asthmatic patients on the platform, that if an severe asthmatic patient's having exacerbations and they've had 3 exacerbations, they should probably be shifting therapy, right? They should move from a steroid to a biologic. What we know is that typically that doesn't happen. They continue to use the steroids, and it takes up to 8 to 12 months before a clinician then realizes and switches therapy. So a clear metric in the platform would be, how did you reduce the timeline in which that data went to the clinician? They realized, oh, wow, 3 exacerbations have happened. This patient should be shifted to therapy and drive better outcomes. So that's moving it from 12 months to 3 weeks. So that's a clear metric. Another one is around usage, right? A lot of these digital health platforms have a lot of churn. So you have patients come in and only the digital savvy patients tend to stay on afterwards, and that creates a lot of inequities. So one of the core metrics are how many patients are staying on, and are you building the experience and providing the tools to actually enable use for the patients that need it most. These are your elderly, severe chronic patients that many times are not the ones actually inputting the information in this. So you have to look at what's around them, right? Is it their children? Is it their caregivers? Do they have internet access? Are the systems you're providing seamless in terms of data input? Are they easy to use? Is it a two-way dialogue? So I think that experience is an important metric to track to make sure there's stickiness. And then the third is efficiency for our customers. You look at the clinicians using this, they have to find efficiency when they do this, which is meaning they can treat more patients more efficiently, quicker. If they're unable to do so, then again, you're not going to get usage and stickiness.
And are these metrics acceptable to you as the leadership team within a pharmaceutical company?
Yeah, they're acceptable because, I would say my belief and what I say is that if you can drive therapy adoption, right therapy for the right patient, then all boats rise, right? So it's not so much about, is it my drug that patient's using? It's more about, is the patient that's supposed to be on a biologic actually being given a biologic at the right time? Now, if it happens to be my biologic or Novartis or GSK or any one of the others, it doesn't matter, because honestly, we'll all gain our fair share of the market, right? So I think if you focus around the patient and the outcome, which is back to the data point, that, what does digital mean? It means being customer-centric and being data-driven. Yeah. If you truly use those two as your North Star, then the entire industry wins.
That's a really refreshing perspective. I'm going to switch gears and ask you a couple of things. In the next, say, 1 year, and then in 5 years, where do you think digital health is going to be? Mm-hmm. And in a similar vein, maybe you can tie that in with, if you could build a pharmaceutical company from scratch, starting today, that has to be launched in 5 years, what would this company look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So maybe I'll just talk about a specialty pharma company, because there's a lot of nuances when you have a gen meds business. So if you have a specialty company, I think now with the prevalence of data, you can be a lot more efficient in your go-to-market model. So you would have, different archetypes. So let's just pick that the company's focused in the US. You could have regions in the US where we probably will not need a sales force. You could influence physicians just by the fact of leveraging data and guiding evidence to them in an efficient manner. In other parts of the US, you'd have a hybrid approach where you actually are using the data to help, our personnel field force drive more efficiency and better targeting. So it is more effective use of resource. And then there is still the personal promotion. You have markets in the US where I think a personal relationship still drives tremendous value, and you'd use data for, again, just for efficiency. So I would see a pharma company that's very lean. The backbone in terms of how they engage their customers is data-driven. You would see an extreme amount of personalization in terms of how you engage patients and HCPs moving from one side of the funnel to another. And you would see a more of an ecosystem approach. So rather than a product and therapy play at a pharma level, you actually try and partner with bigger players in the industry, whether it's associations, whether it's digital health tech companies, to sort of bring a more ecosystem approach to treat that patient and their entire need versus, just providing the clinical element of their need. So you might become the broker rather than the, provider of therapy.
That's interesting. I like that. I'm actually looking at some of the questions coming in. I think there's a couple of really interesting ones here. I might pick the first one because it's super aligned with what we were just talking about. So we spoke about why pharma is partnering with digital health companies. The question is, why should a digital therapeutic company partner with pharma?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. So digital therapeutics work with scale. That's the bottom line, right? So as a digital therapeutic company, the reason you partner with pharma is for scale. That's helps you get into the hands of providers and payers, and helps you understand what kind of evidence is needed to get reimbursed. Sadly, most of the digital tech companies that come to us, they look at pharma as the paycheck. Like we're the ones sort of paying for the solution or subsidizing the cost of growth. Whereas, I think there's an opportunity for digital, therapeutic companies to work with us to say, how does it fit in the model of driving a better outcome? Let's work on those things and then build scale from there, which could still mean we subsidize, but actually then that holds a better win-win for the ecosystem.
Interesting. Another question here. Would you describe as a standard population health management or a platform play, basically? Do you think it is realistic that pharma will be or could be involved at that kind of level and scale, with different individual payers across, your multiple platforms? So is this realistic?
No, it's not.
And or scalable if each pharma had its own, say, Fire server?
Yeah, no, it's not scalable. So I think, pharma is sort of the catalyst, right? I think we are an important industry player that has to drive this vision forward. But in reality, actually, you could envision a tech company or a startup take that vision to scale much faster than we can. We are burdened by some of our own challenges around, quality management systems, riskability, regulatory challenges. So I think our job is to bring the vision and the collaboration in the industry, and seed and use our relationships to kind of then drive scale. So when I talk about scale, it's about using our commercial footprint and relationships we have with governments and peers and providers to scale this idea, but we don't necessarily have to build the idea.
Yeah, I like that, actually. And it's kind of, I've heard this a few times, and I wonder if maybe even different pharma companies could form a consortium along with other players. I guess you've kind of described the utopic situation that we should aspire to. Okay, so another question is, what is Karan's perspective on pharma companies like AZ getting into software development to support drug research and development in the near future?
Yeah, I think that's critical. Again, the lens you look at is from core business. I know we covered commercial and didn't talk about R&D, but R&D has three very clear use cases, right? One is drug discovery. Second is how quickly we can do clinical trials in a decentralized environment and recruit patients into those trials. And the third being digital therapeutics that give us extension on life of our therapy or drive better outcomes for patients. So when you look at those three use cases, there's certainly a big role for software to play, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Now, we don't have to build all of that from scratch, but we do need to make that a strategic competency. So, you could partner to do that. You could buy and bring it in-house to do that. You can start in-house with a few use cases and scale from there, but certainly I see that as part of a pharma company's future.
Okay, awesome. And I really love this question. Will pharma have a big role in picking the winners in digital health?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see two roles emerge, right? One is, digital health companies like Livongo that are vertically integrating, and they're a full service shop, which is, they're directly going to the payers and they're guaranteeing, outcomes for diabetic patients where they actually have clinicians and a digital tool. So that's one go-to-market model. And then you have combination therapy, digital therapeutic companies. And I think there, the pharma companies will definitely play a role in picking the right ones. And again, I think whether it's us or the providers or the payers, the winners are going to be driven by the ones that have good clinical evidence. I think that area is still murky. A lot of the digital therapeutics, and some of you have probably seen releases from my peer companies that have worked with them where they didn't prove outcomes in working with these digital therapeutic companies, right? So at the end of the day, if you don't have outcomes, you will not scale.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I guess, if you look back at the last few years of activity, one could argue that, like you said, some of the digital therapeutics or digital health companies that have gone solo or kind of found their own way have probably attained a bit more traction than those who've gone into a partnership as the primary modality to get them to that level of scale. Cool. And I see we have 3 minutes, so I might take a couple of just 1 or 2 more questions here. Do you believe that in the near future, regulatory approval of new therapies will be contingent upon proving claimed outcomes? And if so, how will life sciences companies capture the data required to demonstrate these outcomes from patients who are prescribed their medications?
Yeah, no, that'll be part of the future. I think it'll be a combination, right? So I don't think the future will pivot to you got to have real world outcomes data in addition to pure clinical trial data. I think pure clinical trial data will still stay. But as you get into combination therapy and digital therapeutics being part of our go-to-market model, then we would seek out that data. And the way to get to that data is twofold. One is, you partner with the real world evidence type companies that are building data platforms in which they're capturing this data, and we buy that data and show evidence. And by the way, we do that today in partnerships with companies like IQVIA, with Viva, with HealthVerity, with Trinetics. So those players exist, or you build your own data platforms, back to the discussion we were having, in which you're capturing data when you launch a digital therapeutics, whether it's connected inhalers or connected pens, and you're collecting that data part and parcel of your go-to-market model. So, but you will need that.
Okay, awesome. So we have 1 minute, and I'm going to make it a fun question. There's loads more here, but unfortunately, we'll just have to call it a day. What are you presently listening to or reading? Do you have any recommendations for us to add to our playlist?
Yeah, it's a good question. You had sent it ahead of time. Unfortunately, I haven't read, I haven't had the opportunity to pick up a book in the last few months. We have been so busy in sort of launching, this digital health platform that I've been tied up in that. But from a listening standpoint, I was listening to sort of the CEO of LinkedIn, and he made a really interesting comment around the idea of MVP and customer centricity that I was very intrigued by. And his point was that a lot of organizations spend too much time debating and making the perfect idea, and very little time actually going out and executing the idea. And his simple takeaway in that learning was that you're better served by doing rather than overthinking. So, that's the mantra that, resonated with me. And it was like, yes, go out and try something. If it doesn't work, no worries. But if it does work, then you know how to make it better, instead of like building big strategy decks. So don't do that.
Love that. That I feel like is a perfect kind of close to this conversation. No analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Karan. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been wonderful to have you here today. And for those of you who are continuing on into our roundtable forums right after this, I'm just going to drop the Zoom link there. Neve's done that, and you must have it in your calendar as well. So I'll see you in the next 15 minutes, but feel free to join before then to join our roundtable conversations. But Karan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Chandna.
Take care. Bye.